Hello, and we're going to look at a 12-mark question in the unit Living the Christian Life. We'll think about some of the arguments and look at the structure of how you answer 12-mark questions to help you create your own answer. So we're going to look at the idea of liturgical and non-liturgical worship. And as a 12-marker, you might get a statement like this: all worship should be liturgical. Do you agree? And we'll have a look and think about how we can argue for and against that statement. We're going to use, as always, the 12-mark structure. And to remind you about how it works, we start with a statement as to whether we agree or disagree with the quote. Then we're going to begin with what we consider a weak argument. So we'll think about the view that we're arguing against, we'll give a weak argument, and then we'll criticize that to explain why we think that's weak. Then we'll select an argument that supports our own viewpoint, so a strong argument, consider a criticism of that argument, and then explain why that criticism doesn't work. So we've got a good structure that builds in evaluation into the way that you're writing, and then obviously we can finish with a conclusion. So here are some ideas for arguments for and against this statement. And we're just going to select from this options. When you come to write your own answer, come back to this part of the video and have a look at the points there and select your own and the order that you want to do it in. I'm going to argue in favor of the statements. So that means we'll start with a weak argument from the arguments against this statement. And I've selected the first one there. You can see I've highlighted it. So having chosen an argument against the statement, saying that all worship doesn't need to be liturgical, there's a variety of styles should be accepted. I'm now going to want to explain why that's a weak argument, and I've just selected the first one that I've highlighted in green there. And then we'll have a look and see how we can put those together to form the beginning of our answer. Okay, so we've selected our arguments for and against. Now what we want to do is transform that content, those ideas, into the 12-mark structure that we've been working on. So we've got the sentence starters on the right-hand side and the arguments on the left. And I'm going to show you now how you take those ideas on the left and develop those using the structure on the right-hand side. So we'll have a read through and you can see what I've done. I've kept highlighted the bits that I've taken from the left, but you can see I've also added a few bits and pieces, a few ideas. In particular, I wanted to include some kind of a quote. So it's a very brief quote that I've included. You'll see that in the second part of what I've considered the weak argument. So let's just have a quick read through and see how that works. So I've said I agree that all worship should be liturgical. Some Christians would disagree because they say a variety of styles of worship should be acceptable. This is important as it allows for the style to be appropriate to the occasion. So I've just taken the idea on the left, I've kind of split it into two bits to show that I've got a point and I've developed that. But we want to say a bit more than what we've got from that point, so I've developed it a bit further. So also indicates how I've developed that. So I've written also, Jesus said God should be worshipped in spirit and truth. That's my quote. And so Christians should be led by the Holy Spirit in their worship. So that's the first part. Now I'm going to explain why that's a weak argument, taking the idea on the left in green. So this is a weak argument because liturgical worship provides a structure to worship which ensures the worship is appropriate to the occasion and ensures that the worship is done in a way that reflects Christian beliefs and with appropriate reverence. So I've deliberately kind of adapted it to show how it responds to the weak argument. So the weak argument was that we need non-liturgical worship to be appropriate for the occasion. And in here I've argued that actually liturgical worship, because it follows the church calendar, so you have special worship for Christmas and Easter and so on, it can actually be appropriate as well. So that's how I've developed that idea. So now we go back to the arguments for and against. Since I'm arguing in favour of the statement, I'm going to first of all select an argument that supports the statement, and I've chosen this point about how Catholics believe that liturgical worship, such as the Mass, so the Mass is the main service in the Catholic Church, which has very, very clear structures, and how it's important because it means that everybody worships in the same way, everyone across the world and also throughout history. So it kind of unites and links Catholics, Christians together throughout the world and throughout history. Next, we want to think about what someone would say to criticize that viewpoint. So the contrast with the Catholic tradition would be the Pentecostal tradition, which usually rejects liturgical worship, and they tend to argue that worship should be informal, that it allows people worshipping to communicate to God kind of directly through the Holy Spirit in a kind of improvised way, in a way that expresses from their heart and perhaps makes them feel most comfortable. So that's the argument against the point that I've made. And then finally, I need to select a way of responding to that. So I've looked at the way that liturgical worship can mean that everyone is kind of supporting each other. They know what to expect because it's all written down. There's a set pattern that people will understand and be expecting in the church. Okay, so we've got our ideas, and as you see, there's a kind of sandwich approach here. My strong argument, a criticism of my strong argument, and then why that criticism doesn't work. And what we want to do is take that content and convert it into a good structure where we're evaluating the content, which is what the sentence starters on the right help us to do. So we'll read through this, but once again, you can see how I've taken the content in which I've highlighted in green and red. We've got the sentence starters there, which are not highlighted, and you can also see that I've added a few points here and there just to sort of kind of pad out and develop the my answer to make sure it's a full and complete answer that will get me 12 marks, or at least very close to that. So let's just have a read over and see what it looks like. So a stronger argument, so that by using that language, it shows that we're evaluating the different points of view. So that's important that we use that kind of language. So a stronger argument is that Catholics feel that liturgical worship, such as the Mass, is important as it means that they all worship in the same way. This is important because this gives them unity around the world and throughout history. Again, I've split the sentence in half so that we've got a kind of a point and a clear development of that, even though it was all in one bullet point. Some Pentecostal Christians might respond that worship should be informal and allow the people worshipping to communicate with the Holy Spirit in the way they feel most comfortable. So I've just literally copied and pasted that there. When you're writing yours, you might want to adapt the language a little bit, develop it a little bit, as I have in other places. Now I need to respond to that criticism. So, however, I would argue worship should be liturgical as it means that everyone worshipping can be supported by those around them doing the same thing. This is important because public worship should be done as a community and not as individuals, and everyone will know what to do. So again, you see I've kind of split the point in green in half, and I've added a bit of some extra ideas. So just the idea that when you're in church, you're worshipping God as a community and not as an individual. So non-liturgical worship perhaps might be appropriate for private worship, but in the church, it makes sense that it would be liturgical. What I haven't done there is a kind of conclusion. So we'd want to add a conclusion at the end. So kind of in conclusion, and then pull out what you think is the most significant point. So, in conclusion, worship in a church should be done as a community together where people know what to expect, and there are set words and a set order, something like that. Therefore, I agree with the statement. And again, just to finish off and just to re-emphasize the importance of the structure, we're moving from a weak argument, which we're then going to criticize, and that's what the sentence starters on the right help you with. Then we've got a strong argument, a criticism of that, and a response. So those 5 elements give you really good structure to your 12-mark answer. As long as you're explaining and developing each of those 5 sections. Try and include some quotes where you can. Then that will give you a really good 12-mark answer. So what you should do now is kind of pause the video, kind of rewind, have a look at the suggested content and come up with your own answer. I deliberately decided to support the statement because I think most students would be more tempted to go against the statement. So I suggest that you rearrange the arguments to present your own viewpoint if you are going to argue against. If you're going to argue for, see if you can set things out in a slightly different order than the way I've done. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.